My wife said she needed space on a Tuesday morning while I was rinsing a coffee mug I did not remember using. She stood in the doorway with her coat already on, hair neat, voice soft and rehearsed, like she was reading from a card she had practiced in the mirror. She said space the way people say weather, like it was a condition, not a choice. I nodded. That part surprised her. She was ready for arguing, for bargaining, for me to ask questions I did not want answers to. She had a sequence prepared. I could see it in the way her shoulders stayed tight after I agreed. She said she would stay with a friend for a while. She said we both needed time. She said she wanted to do this right. I watched water bead and slide off the mug. I said, okay. She waited for more. There was no more. By that night, she had taken 3 suitcases and the spare laptop. The closet looked like a mouth missing teeth. The house smelled like her shampoo until it didn't. I slept on my side of the bed because it felt wrong to move. At 6 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a message from our daughter. It said, "Are you okay?" and nothing else. I typed yes. I deleted it. I typed again. I sent nothing. 2 days later, she moved in with someone new. I did not learn that from her. I learned it from a picture sent by my son, careless as a receipt. It showed her smiling on a couch I did not recognize, a throw pillow with a slogan, a hand on her knee that was not mine. My son added a caption, "Just so you know where Mom is," as if I had asked. I stared at the picture until the room felt smaller. Then I closed the app. I put the phone face down. I stood up. I walked to the breaker panel in the garage and turned off the light to the guest room. Habit. I turned it back on. I laughed once, a dry sound that surprised me. The language started immediately. Space, boundaries, emotional safety, growth. My wife had learned the words in workshops and HR meetings and podcasts on the drive home. She used them like gauze, clean, white, absorbent. When my daughter called that evening, she used them too. She said Mom needed support. She said this was not about me. She said she did not want to be in the middle. "You are already in the middle," I said. She went quiet. I apologized. Reflex. She accepted. That was the first thing I noticed. How quickly the balance shifted. How easily they stepped into the open space. I changed my number on Friday. I did not announce it. I did not warn anyone. I went to the carrier store at lunch and asked for a new line. The clerk tried to upsell me a case. I declined. I stood in the parking lot and sent 2 messages from the old number. One to my mother, one to my boss. New number. Call if urgent. That was it. When I got home, I unplugged the landline. I logged into the router and changed the Wi-Fi name and password. I deleted social apps one by one. Each icon vanished with a soft ripple, like a pond swallowing stones. I closed the blinds in the front room. I did not do this dramatically. I did it carefully. I was not hiding. I was sealing. People assume silence is weakness. They think it means you have nothing to say. Silence is a system. Silence is a door. The gossip filled the gap fast. Friends of friends reached out, then stopped. Invitations dried up. My wife's sister posted a vague message about choosing peace. Someone sent me a screenshot of a group chat I had not known existed. My name was a subject line: unstable, difficult, cold. That one stung, because it was accurate and still unfair. At work, nothing changed at first. That is the thing about buildings. They do not care what happens at home. Doors still open at 7. Elevators still hum. I had been the facilities and logistics director for the medical network for 8 years. People called me when locks failed and schedules broke. I knew which badge worked where, which light came on when, which alarm chirped when someone forgot a code. I was invisible until I was not. My wife knew that about me. She had teased me about it at dinner parties. "The man who knows where the switches are," she would say, and people would laugh politely. She did not laugh now. She was busy rewriting. The first rewrite came through her parents. They called my old number. It went nowhere. They called my office and left a message with the receptionist, who forwarded it to me with a subject line that said, "Personal." I did not open it. I let it sit. I watched the little blue dot fade when I moved my eyes away. Control is not the same as cruelty. Sometimes it is just timing. My son showed up at my place the next weekend. He rang the bell like he owned it. He knocked when I did not answer. I stood in the kitchen and listened to the wood echo. I imagined him counting to 10, the way he had when he was a kid. He did not get to 10. He left. I saw his reflection in the darkened glass as he walked away. He looked angry. Good. The dirty details arrived the way they always do, sideways. A neighbor mentioned seeing my wife's car at a townhouse across town. A colleague asked if everything was okay with a look that said they already knew it was not. Someone forwarded a post my daughter had liked about choosing chosen family. It was all very modern, very clean. I did not respond. I reorganized. I moved my important documents to a fireproof box and put it under my desk at work. I updated beneficiaries. I canceled joint accounts that did not need to be joint. I did not drain anything. I did not hide anything. I followed the rules better than anyone ever had. That is what my wife had taught me. The rules are a language. Speak them clearly and no one can say you shouted. A month after she left, I was reviewing access logs when the notification came up on the monitor. Camera 3, front entrance. I clicked it open. The feed showed my wife standing just outside the glass doors of my office building. She looked good. She always did when she wanted something. Her parents were with her, faces tight, phones out. I watched her mouth move. I could not hear the words, but I knew them. Closure. Conversation. Responsibility. She pressed the intercom. The receptionist's voice crackled through my phone from the desk across the hall. "There is someone here for you," she said. "Careful." I stood up. I walked to the door of my office. I put my hand on the handle. I imagined opening it. I imagined the performance that would follow. I did not open the door. On the monitor, my wife turned her phone so the screen faced the camera. Her parents were on speaker. Their mouths moved in unison. It looked like a bad choir. I felt a small, precise click inside my chest. Not anger, recognition. People adapt faster than you think. They fill empty spaces with whatever fits. They do not ask if it should fit. They ask if it can. I stepped back from the door. I sat down. I pulled the access logs closer and scrolled, watching patterns emerge. When I looked up again, the entrance was empty. That was when I stopped thinking like a husband and started thinking like a building. Before we go any further, hit the hype button, take a second to subscribe and like the video. It really helps the channel grow. And tell us in the comments, what would you do in this situation? They rewrote me fast. It happened in pieces, like furniture moving out of a room one item at a time. You do not notice the space until you trip over it. A coworker stopped making eye contact. A neighbor waved and then remembered something urgent in their car. My sister-in-law unfollowed me without a word. The silence had texture now. It pressed back. My daughter called from a number I did not recognize. I let it ring once, twice. I answered on the third. She said Mom was struggling. She said I was making things harder by not communicating. She said therapy taught her that avoidance is a form of control. I smiled at the wall. I asked her if she knew where Mom was living. She hesitated, then said, it did not matter. I told her it mattered to me. She said she did not want to triangulate. You already did, I said. Again with the quiet. Again with the apology. It slid out of me like a habit I had not broken yet. She accepted it like a currency that still worked. After that, the messages came through other people. A friend from church who meant well. A cousin who had always been neutral. Each one carried the same note wrapped in a different envelope. She is worried about you. The kids are worried. This could get ugly if you do not talk. Ugly is a word people use when they want compliance without naming the cost. At work, my calendar filled the way it always did. Inspections, badge audits, a remodel walkthrough for a new outpatient wing. I wore the same blue shirt and walked the same corridors. The doors recognized me. The locks did not hesitate. That steadiness mattered. It reminded me who I was when no one was narrating. The first real cut came from my son. He posted a long thing late one night, a paragraph-heavy confession about growing up around emotional distance. He did not use my name. He did not need to. He tagged our town. He tagged resilience. People commented with hearts and claps and stories of their own fathers. Someone wrote proud of you for speaking your truth. I closed the app and stared at the dark reflection of my face in the screen. Truth is a powerful solvent. It dissolves context first. The group chat screenshot arrived the next morning from a coworker who felt uncomfortable keeping it. My name again. A joke about my silence. A guess about my mental state. A line from my wife that said, "He always did this when he wanted to punish." I read it twice. I saved it. I did not reply. I learned where my wife was living from a delivery mistake. A package showed up at my door addressed to her. The return label told me everything I needed to know. A townhouse complex across town, new construction, shared walls. I drove past once, slow, like I was looking for a house number that might have changed. I did not stop. I did not need to see inside. She was building a narrative, and she was good at it. She used therapy words like scaffolding. She put people in roles and they accepted them. The kids became witnesses. Her parents became concerned elders. I became a risk. That word showed up in an email from her father, forwarded by my mother with a question mark. Risk. As if I was a leak in a pipe, as if something needed to be contained. I closed every door. Not literally. That came later. First, I closed the ones that mattered. I removed my wife as an emergency contact where it was still possible. I updated my file with HR and checked the box that said no personal calls during work hours. I asked security to route all visitor requests through me. I told them it was temporary. They nodded. They did not ask questions. They knew me. They trusted systems. The kids tried a new angle. They sent a joint email from an address I had never seen. It was carefully written, bullet-free, earnest. They wanted a mediated conversation. They wanted me to acknowledge harm. They wanted me to commit to a path forward. I printed it. I folded the paper twice. I put it in the fireproof box under my desk. Paper has weight. Digital does not. At night, the house settled around me like a held breath. I noticed things I had not before. The way the refrigerator clicked after cycling. The way the streetlight hummed at exactly the same pitch as the old air handler at work. I slept lightly. Not badly. Light is different. Light is aware. One afternoon, my wife tried the office again. Not with her parents this time. Alone. She wore a neutral dress and a face that said, reasonable. She spoke to the receptionist and gestured toward my office like she belonged there. The receptionist called me anyway. I watched the camera feed and felt nothing I could name. I sent security down. They did their job politely. They asked her to leave. She did, but not before looking straight into the camera above the door. I held her gaze through glass and distance and equipment older than our marriage. It was the first time she understood that the silence was not confusion. The rewrite continued. Stories calcified. People stopped checking on me and started checking around me. I let it happen. Pressure needs space to build. When my son showed up at the parking garage one evening, I was not surprised. He waited near my car, arms crossed, blocking the lane like a child daring a bus to honk. I parked anyway. I cut the engine. I stepped out. "You cannot just disappear," he said. His voice cracked. "Good. You do not get to do this." I looked at the concrete. Oil stains like old maps. I said I get to choose who has access. He laughed, sharp. He said Mom is scared. He said we are all scared. He said this ends now. I stepped closer. Not threatening, just close enough that he had to adjust. The garage swallowed sound. I told him to move. He did not. I reached past him and pressed the button that opened the stairwell door. It clicked. He flinched. He moved without noticing he had. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel. In the mirror, the garage lights blinked out one by one behind me. That night, I opened the access logs again. Patterns were clearer now. People thought they were watching me. They did not know I was watching the doors they walked through. I was no longer being rewritten. I was being outlined. The thing about systems is that they remember even when people pretend not to. By the time my wife showed up at my office with her parents on speaker again, I had already started seeing the seams. The way schedules overlapped, the way access depended on routines nobody questioned, the way my name still sat quietly inside workflows that everyone assumed ran themselves. I did not pull anything yet. I just watched. The second visit happened on a Thursday. Late morning. She knew my rhythm. She always had. She timed it between meetings, between the lunch rush in the lobby, when the building felt calm but not empty. She brought her parents again, but this time she also brought paperwork. A folder. Thick, the universal sign of seriousness. The receptionist called. Her voice was careful again. I said thank you and hung up. I did not stand. I did not move. I turned my chair slightly so I could see the camera feed without looking like I was trying. My wife stood straight, shoulders back, chin up. Her mother leaned in toward the phone like it could hear posture. Her father spoke first. He said my name slowly, like he was reading it from a list. He said they were worried. He said this silence was unhealthy. He said, families do not shut each other out. Families do not replace each other either, I thought, but I did not say it. She pressed the intercom again. The receptionist looked at me through the glass wall of my office. I shook my head once. She nodded and turned back to her screen. Professional. Loyal. Systems again. My wife held the phone up higher so the speaker could catch everything. I could hear her parents now through the faint echo bleeding into the hallway mic. They talked about responsibility, about appearances, about how things could escalate if left unresolved. The word legal floated through the air like a warning buoy. I let it float. After 10 minutes, security arrived. 2 officers, neutral, trained not to inflame. They spoke to my wife softly. They asked her to step outside. She argued, not loudly, just enough. Enough to be recorded, enough to feel wrong. When she finally turned to leave, she looked straight at the camera again. This time there was something else in her face. Not anger, calculation. I closed the feed and leaned back in my chair. My heart rate had barely moved. That was new. I made a note of it. That afternoon, the kids escalated. My daughter posted a long thread about accountability and harm. She did not mention names. She did not need to. Friends commented with stories of their own parents. Someone said silence is abuse. Someone else said boundaries go both ways. I read until the words blurred, and then I stopped. I did not comment. I did not like. I did not defend myself. Defensiveness feeds the story you are being cast in. Instead, I checked schedules. My son worked for a construction firm that did a lot of work for our network. Not directly under me. Adjacent. I had always kept that line clean. Ethics mattered. Appearances mattered. Now I noticed how often his project meetings overlapped with site access windows. How often his badge logs showed him tailgating through secure doors instead of scanning properly. Not a crime. Just a habit. Habits are where systems breathe. My daughter handled marketing and PR for a regional nonprofit that rented space from us twice a year for fundraising events. She was good at optics. She understood crowd flow and sightlines. She also understood nothing about security protocols. She had never needed to. My wife, of course, understood them all. She had sat at my table for years listening to me talk about doors and locks and people who forget their badges. She had absorbed it without meaning to. She thought that knowledge was harmless. That night, she tried a different door. She sent an email to my boss. It was polite, concerned. She said she was worried about my mental state. She said I had been isolating myself. She said my behavior might affect my work. She attached screenshots. Selected, contextless, effective. My boss called me in the next morning. He closed the door. He asked how I was doing. He asked if everything at home was okay. He asked if I needed time off. I told him the truth in a way that did not invite more questions. I said my marriage was ending. I said I was fine. I said my work had not suffered. He believed me because my work had not suffered. Numbers do not lie the way people do. Still, the seed was planted. That was my wife's strength. She did not need immediate results. She needed eventual outcomes. I adjusted. I requested a formal review of access protocols under the guise of compliance. Routine, boring, approved without comment. I asked for temporary authority to audit badge usage across departments. Granted. Nobody objected to more security. Nobody ever does. At home, the kids tried one last time to break the silence directly. They came together, unannounced, to my front door. I watched them through the peephole like strangers. My daughter held her phone up, recording. My son knocked. "Dad," my daughter said, "we just want to talk." I did not open the door. They talked anyway. They told the door about pain, about consequences, about how this could all stop if I would just engage. They stayed 20 minutes, long enough for the neighbors to notice, long enough to feel like a performance. When they left, my daughter wiped her eyes dramatically. My son kicked the step. I waited until their car was gone before I moved. I did not feel powerful. I felt aligned. The rewrite was done. The roles were set. I was the obstacle now, the problem to be managed. That was fine. Problems are solved. I opened my laptop and began repositioning myself physically. Repositioning sounds dramatic. It was not. It was logistical. I stopped working from my office as much and started moving through the buildings. I showed up in mechanical rooms and loading docks and stairwells that never made it into brochures. I talked to people who fixed things quietly and went home without stories. I listened. I remembered names. I checked doors. I asked questions that sounded routine and landed like markers. Who has access after hours? Who escorts vendors? Who signs off on temporary badges? I framed it all as compliance, as tightening, as protecting patients. Nobody argued. Nobody ever argues against protection. At home, I packed a go bag and left it in the trunk of my car. Nothing dramatic. Clothes, copies of documents, a flashlight. I did not plan to run. I planned not to be surprised. My wife noticed the shift before anyone else. She always had a good sense for momentum. She stopped pushing publicly and started working privately. Mutual friends received calls, gentle ones. She asked about me. She expressed concern. She wondered out loud if I was okay to be alone. That narrative sticks if you let it. I did not let it. I asked HR to document every interaction related to my case. I asked security to preserve footage from any visits involving my family. I did it calmly, professionally. I smiled while I did it. People trust smiles more than words. The kids grew restless. My son sent a message to my old email address. He accused me of manipulating the situation by refusing to engage. He said Mom was hurting. He said this was cruel. I read it twice and archived it. Cruelty implies intent to harm. I had intent to end something. My daughter took a different tack. She reached out to a reporter she knew through work, a soft pitch, a human interest angle. Estranged father refuses contact while family pleads for reconciliation. The reporter called me at work. I let it go to voicemail. I did not need to answer. The story loses oxygen without response. Instead, I started preparing the ground. The medical network was hosting a regional conference in 6 weeks. Vendors, donors, administrators. My daughter's nonprofit was scheduled to hold a fundraiser in one of the auxiliary halls the same weekend. My son's firm had a booth on the expo floor. My wife knew this. She had helped coordinate similar events in the past. They were all going to be in the same place. I requested minor changes, a room reassignment here, a security checkpoint there. I framed them as crowd control, as safety, as liability mitigation. Approved, approved, approved. Nothing illegal, nothing dramatic, just adjustments. The first real confrontation came sooner than I expected. My son-in-law cornered me outside a satellite clinic one evening. He was leaning against his car like he had rehearsed the pose. Casual, dominant. He said my name like we were friends. "We need to talk," he said. I told him I was on my way somewhere. He stepped into my path. The parking lot was mostly empty. Cameras covered the entrance, not the far edge. "You cannot freeze everyone out," he said. "You think you are being clever. You are just making it worse." I looked past him at the building. I told him to move. He laughed. He said, "Make me." I stepped closer, not fast, not slow, close enough that he had to straighten. I pointed to the camera dome above the door. I said this conversation is over. I said if he blocked my path again, security would escort him off property permanently. He scoffed. He moved anyway. He always had been loud right up until he was not. As I walked away, I heard him mutter something about control, about games. I smiled because he was wrong. This was not a game. Games end. Systems persist. That night, I reviewed badge logs again. Patterns were sharper now. My son's tailgating habit. My daughter's event access shortcuts. My wife's lingering credentials that had never been revoked because no one thought to. I submitted a request to update them all. Routine maintenance. I slept well for the first time in weeks. In the morning, my wife called from a blocked number. I let it ring. When it stopped, I opened my calendar and looked at the conference schedule. Everything was lining up. The pressure had nowhere else to go. It was time to let it build. Pressure changes people before it breaks them. The first signs showed up in small ways. A vendor complained about a delayed badge. A contractor asked why escort rules had changed. My son called my office line and left a message that was half anger, half fear. I listened once. I deleted it. The audit gave me what I needed without me having to ask directly. Logs, timestamps, names attached to habits nobody had ever corrected because it was easier not to. Tailgating, shared credentials, after-hours access without purpose. Nothing criminal, nothing dramatic. Just enough friction to make movement harder. I did not target anyone. I tightened everything. The effect was immediate. People started bumping into walls they had not noticed before. Doors that had always opened now paused. Elevators required badges. Security guards asked questions they had never asked. My son-in-law felt it first. He was supposed to meet a client at one of our outpatient facilities after hours. He liked the empty hallways. He liked feeling important. He texted my daughter when his badge did not work. She told him to wait. He waited 10 minutes before security approached him and asked why he was there. He called me that night from a number I did not recognize. I let it ring. He left a message that started angry and ended confused. He said this was ridiculous. He said I was abusing my position. He said he would take this up the chain. He never did. Complaints have a way of disappearing when they are vague. My daughter escalated next. Her nonprofit fundraiser needed access to the auxiliary hall early for setup. They had always done it that way. She emailed facilities. She CC'd people. She used the tone she saved for vendors who did not respond fast enough. The reply came from an automated system this time. Setup access begins at the scheduled time. No exceptions. She called me at work. "You cannot do this," she said. Her voice was tight. "People are coming. This affects my job." I told her to submit a formal request. I told her policies had changed. I told her it was not personal. She said everything you do feels personal now. I said that might be because it was always personal for me. She hung up. The conference loomed closer. My wife went quiet again. That worried me more than the noise. Silence means recalculation. She struck on a Monday. My boss called me into his office with HR present. They closed the door. They said concerns had been raised. They said my family situation was bleeding into work. They said I was being inflexible. I listened. I nodded. I handed them a folder. Inside were documented requests, approved changes, compliance language, risk assessments, everything I had done mapped cleanly to policy. I did not defend myself. I explained systems. They thanked me. They asked if I needed support. I said no. When I left, HR smiled the way people do when they realize they have been used as a tool, and it worked anyway. That night, my wife tried to come through a different door. She emailed me directly. No accusation, no threat. Just memory. She wrote about our early years, about how I used to listen, about how this did not have to be a war. War implies two sides fighting openly. This was not that. I did not reply. Instead, I scheduled the final security walkthrough for the conference weekend. I adjusted guard rotations. I confirmed camera angles. I made sure the auxiliary hall shared an entrance corridor with the expo floor for exactly 15 minutes during peak foot traffic. Not enough to be dangerous, enough to be visible. The unexpected twist came from her parents. They showed up at my house unannounced on a Sunday afternoon. I watched them through the front window. They looked older than I remembered, smaller. They rang the bell. I did not answer. Her father spoke through the door. He said this had gone far enough. He said I was hurting people. He said my wife was scared. I opened the door then, just enough to speak, not enough to invite them in. I said I had documentation. I said everything happening was within policy. I said if they were worried about their daughter, they should ask why she had moved in with someone else before ending her marriage. Her mother gasped. Her father stared at the floor. I closed the door. The conference week arrived heavy and humid. The building buzzed with people who did not know they were part of something larger than themselves. On the morning of the fundraiser, my daughter texted from a new number. Please, just talk to us. I stood in the security office watching camera feeds populate one by one. I saw my wife arrive with practiced calm. I saw my son pacing near the expo booths. I saw my son-in-law arguing with a guard. I did not feel anger. I felt readiness. Doors were about to close. The first door closed quietly. My son-in-law was still arguing with the guard when I stepped into the corridor. He saw me and straightened, like a man who thinks volume equals leverage. The guard looked at me for confirmation. I nodded once. He stepped back. You are doing this on purpose, my son-in-law said. His voice bounced off the concrete walls. People turned. Not many. Enough. I told him to lower his voice. He did not. He said my name again, louder, like he was summoning authority. I let him talk. I let the cameras watch. When he finished, I asked him for his badge. He laughed. He said he did not need one. I told him that was the problem. Security took him aside. They did not touch him at first. They explained policy. They explained escort requirements. They explained consequences. He grew red. He gestured wildly. When he stepped forward again, they took his arm. Firm. Professional. Not dramatic. That was action scene 1. It lasted 90 seconds. It was enough. Word moved fast. My daughter appeared at the end of the hall, phone already out, eyes sharp. She saw her husband being escorted away and looked straight at me. There was something like disbelief there, followed by calculation. She walked toward me, filming. You are humiliating him, she said. I said he humiliated himself by ignoring rules he assumed did not apply to him. She told me to stop. She told me this would destroy her career. She told me everyone was watching. I looked around. People were watching, not the way she meant. I said, you taught me optics. Remember. She stopped recording. The expo floor opened 10 minutes later. Vendors flowed in. My son stood at his firm's booth, jaw tight, smile forced. When he saw me, he walked over fast. "You cannot do this here," he said. "This is not the place." I told him this was exactly the place. He said Mom was on her way. I told him I knew. The fundraiser doors opened. My daughter's team scrambled to adjust to the delayed setup. Banners were crooked. Tables were misaligned. Small things, but visible. Donors' notice visible. My wife arrived like she always did, calm, prepared. She wore a neutral suit and a practiced expression. When she saw me, she smiled like we were colleagues. She came close enough to speak without raising her voice. "You think you are winning?" she said. I said, "I think you trained me." Her smile faltered. Just for a second. The pressure finally broke when a donor asked a question my daughter could not answer. Access. Why her guests had been delayed. Why security was stricter than last year. The donor was polite, curious, loud enough. My daughter looked at me. I shrugged. "Policy changed," I said. "Safety." My son tried to intervene. He stepped between us. That was his mistake. He grabbed my arm. Not hard, not violent. Enough. Security reacted instantly. Hands on him. Voices raised, people stopped. Phones came out. That was action scene 2. It lasted less than a minute. My wife raised her voice then. She said, "Stop." She said, "This is insane." She said, "Look at what you are doing." I leaned close enough that only she could hear me. I said, "You taught me language. You taught me process. You taught me how to make people doubt themselves while smiling." Her eyes widened. Recognition. The hallway filled. Donors whispered. Vendors stared. The fundraiser stalled. The expo buzz turned sharp. This was the moment everyone realized the story they had been telling themselves did not explain what they were seeing. My wife tried one last move. She told security I was unstable. She told them she was concerned for everyone's safety. She used every word she had practiced. Security looked at me, then at her, then at the logs on their tablet. Requests, approvals, names. They did not move. That was when she understood she had lost control. The final door closed when my son lunged again, shouting now, breaking character. Security took him down to his knees. Not violent, not cinematic, real. The room held its breath. I stepped forward. I said, "This ends now." I looked at my wife. I said, "You wanted space." She stared at me, face stripped of performance. I said, "I gave you all of it." The sound that followed was not applause or shouting. It was the low, confused murmur of a crowd realizing something permanent had just happened. Security pulled my son to his feet and guided him away. He kept looking back at me like he was waiting for permission to speak. He did not get it. My daughter stood frozen, phone hanging useless in her hand. Her fundraiser volunteers whispered urgently, trying to decide whether to continue or retreat. Donors drifted toward exits with the politeness of people who would later describe the moment as uncomfortable. My wife recovered faster than the kids. She always did. She straightened her jacket, smoothed an imaginary crease, and turned to the nearest administrator with the calm authority she had perfected over years of consulting. She said there had been a misunderstanding. She said emotions were high. She said she would handle it. I stepped in front of her. Not touching. Just enough to block her path. "This is handled," I said. Her eyes flicked past me, searching for someone higher up the chain, someone to override. There was no one. I was the chain in this building. I had made sure of that. She lowered her voice. "You are enjoying this," she said. "No," I said. "I am finishing it." She laughed softly, like we were sharing a private joke. "You cannot destroy your children and call it justice." I said they destroyed themselves the moment they decided silence was guilt. She opened her mouth to reply, then stopped. A guard handed her a tablet. She frowned, scrolling. Her color changed. Her old credentials had finally been revoked. Not just here. Everywhere. She looked at me with something close to panic now. "You did this today. I said I did this when you moved out and assumed the house would still be yours." Behind us, the expo floor buzzed with a new kind of energy. Not excitement. Attention. People were watching from a distance, pretending not to. The story was already spreading, stripped of nuance, sharpened by shock. My daughter found her voice again. She stepped forward, tears streaking her face in a way that looked almost convincing. "Dad, please. You are ruining everything." I turned to her. I kept my voice even. I said, "You invited strangers into our life to judge me. You taught them what to think before you asked me what I felt." She shook her head violently. "That is not what happened." I said, "That is exactly what happened." A security supervisor approached and asked if I wanted the family escorted out. He said family carefully, like it was still a shared category. I said yes. My wife protested. She said this was outrageous. She said she would file complaints. She said names. She said consequences. Security did not argue. They did not need to. As they guided my wife and daughter toward the exit, my wife leaned close one last time. Her voice dropped. "You think this ends with doors?" she said. "It does not." I looked at her. I said everything ends with doors. They were gone. The corridor felt wider without them, louder. People slowly returned to their programs and booths, but the rhythm was off. Once you see the wiring behind the walls, the lights never feel the same. I did not stay to watch the cleanup. I walked back to the security office. I closed the door. I sat down. My hands were steady. On the monitors, I watched my son-in-law pacing outside, phone pressed to his ear, face red. I watched my son slump against a concrete column, finally quiet. I watched my daughter argue with a volunteer, pointing back toward the building like something had been stolen. My wife stood apart from them all. She was already planning her next move. So was I. The next move came from her before I left the building. She did not come back inside. She did not shout. She did not plead. She did what she always did when brute force failed. She went quiet and started dialing. By the time I reached my car, my phone was buzzing with internal alerts, emails, calendar pings, an urgent request from legal, a note from HR flagged high priority. She was telling the story again, faster this time, sharper, aiming higher. I drove anyway. I did not speed. I did not rush. Panic makes mistakes. I had learned that watching alarms go off in hospitals at 2 a.m. The people who sprint always trip. I parked in my usual spot and went back inside through the employee entrance. The guard nodded at me like nothing unusual had happened. That steadiness grounded me. Legal was already in a conference room when I arrived. 2 attorneys, 1 HR representative, my boss. Faces serious, not hostile. That mattered. They asked me to walk them through what happened, so I did. I started at policy. I talked about access control, escalation protocols, crowd safety. I referenced timestamps and approvals. I did not mention my wife until they did. When they did, I used her full name and her role as an external party. I kept emotion out of it. Halfway through, one of the attorneys stopped me. He asked if I had anticipated the confrontation. I said yes. The HR representative stiffened. Anticipation sounds like intent. I corrected myself. I said I anticipated risk. I mitigated it. That language mattered. My boss asked if I felt safe continuing in my role. He asked it carefully. My wife had taught him that phrasing. I said I felt safe. I said the building was safe. I said the situation had resolved. It had not. Not fully, but this part had. They excused me after an hour. They said they would follow up. They said I should go home and rest. They said a lot of things people say when they want normalcy back. In the parking lot, my son-in-law intercepted me again. This time he did not posture. He looked small. His confidence had leaked out somewhere between the lobby and the curb. "You think you are untouchable," he said. I opened my car door. I told him to step back. He did. He said, "This is not over." I looked at him. I said, "It is for you." He blinked. He did not understand. He would later. At home, I did not turn on lights right away. I sat in the dark and listened to the house. The quiet was different now. It was not holding its breath. It was waiting. The call came just after 9. My wife. Not blocked, not private. Her actual number. I answered. She did not greet me. She said, "You humiliated our children." I said, "You positioned them as weapons." She said, "You crossed a line today." I said, "You drew the map." There was silence. Real silence this time. No breathing tricks, no background noise. Then she said something I had not expected. She said, "I know what you are doing." I leaned back in the chair. I said, "Tell me." She said, "You are closing doors, one by one, not loudly, not illegally. You are letting us walk into walls we did not know were there." I said, "You taught me how to do that." She laughed then, a short, broken sound. She said, "I never thought you were listening." I said, "I listened every time you said words matter." Her voice hardened. She said, "The kids will not forgive you." I said, "Forgiveness is not my goal." She asked what was. I stood and walked to the breaker panel in the garage. I rested my hand on it like an old friend. I said, "Separation." She whispered that I was cruel. I said, "Cruelty is pretending nothing changed after you moved in with someone else." She hung up. I slept for 3 hours. Deep. Dreamless. In the morning, the final phase began. The fundraiser fallout had reached donors overnight. Emails went out. Apologies drafted. My daughter's nonprofit posted a vague statement about unforeseen circumstances. Comments were not kind. My son's firm called him into a meeting. Someone had noticed the incident. Someone had asked about professionalism and judgment. He called me twice. I did not answer. At noon, my wife tried one last public move. She filed a formal complaint with the board. I read it carefully. Then I forwarded it to legal, compliance, and security with a single sentence. "Please advise on next steps per policy." The board scheduled a hearing. They scheduled it in the same building. I confirmed the room assignment myself. The doors were still mine. And this time, there would be no crowd. Only walls. And truth. The hearing was set for Friday at 9. Closed session. Board members, legal, HR, security on standby. No family allowed unless requested. My wife requested. They denied. Policy. I arrived early. I always did. I walked the floor once, slow, listening to the building wake up. The HVAC kicked on in stages. Lights followed in a pattern I had memorized years ago without meaning to. The conference room door opened cleanly with my badge. I checked the camera angle and adjusted a chair an inch to the left so it would not block the lens. Small things matter. My wife arrived exactly on time. She wore a darker suit than before. Conservative, credible. She carried herself like someone who belonged in rooms like this. She looked at me once, just long enough to confirm I was alone, then turned away. The board members filtered in. Polite nods, neutral faces. The chair opened the meeting and explained the process. My wife was invited to speak first. She did not waste time. She talked about emotional abandonment, about patterns of control, about how my silence had escalated into intimidation. She described the conference incident as reckless. She said she feared for her children's well-being. She never raised her voice. She never cried. She knew better. When she finished, the room sat quiet for a beat longer than necessary. Then the chair turned to me. I did not stand. I did not pace. I stayed seated and placed my hands flat on the table. I said I would address the allegations in order. I started with access control. I explained the audit. I referenced policy numbers. I outlined the changes and why they were approved. I showed timestamps. I did not mention names. Then I moved to the conference. I played the footage. No commentary. No narration. Just angles and sound. Her parents on speaker at the door weeks earlier. Security escorting my son-in-law after repeated warnings. My son grabbing my arm. Security intervening. My wife raising her voice. The room changed as the footage played. People lean forward when reality contradicts a story they already accepted. I stopped the video before the end. I said I chose not to engage verbally because I was advised not to. I said my silence was not a tactic, it was a boundary. I said every interaction had been documented and reviewed by legal in advance. One board member asked if I anticipated the emotional impact on my family. I said yes. He asked if I cared. I looked at him and said, caring does not mean surrendering safety or process. It means refusing to escalate. My wife spoke up then. She said I was reframing cruelty as compliance. She said I was hiding behind systems. I nodded. I said systems are the only thing that kept this from becoming chaos. Legal asked my wife if she had moved in with someone else before formally separating. She hesitated. I did not look at her. She answered eventually. She said yes. The room went still again. Legal asked if she had retained access credentials after leaving the marital home. She said she did not think it mattered. Security slid a tablet across the table showing the access revocation timeline. The date was clear. The chair called for a brief recess. I stepped into the hall and stood by the window. I watched clouds move the way they always did, slow and indifferent. When they called us back in, the decision was delivered calmly. The complaint was dismissed, not denied, dismissed. The language mattered. The chair said there was no evidence of misconduct. She said my actions fell within my authority and responsibility. She said personal matters should be resolved outside professional environments. My wife stared at the table like it might open. They excused her first. She stood, gathered her things, and walked past me without looking. At the door, she stopped. She said quietly, "You think you won." I said, "I think this building is finished with us." She left. The chair asked if I needed support. I said no. I walked back through the corridor alone. Phones buzzed as the decision spread. People glanced up and then away. The air felt lighter, like a storm had chosen a different town. I did not go home. I went back to the security office. I pulled up the final feed. My daughter was in the lobby. She had not been invited. She was crying openly now, not for effect. Real tears. She argued with the receptionist. She pointed at the hallway. She demanded to be let through. Security moved toward her. I stood up. This was the last door, and I was about to close it myself.